Hello? Hi, how are you? Hi. I was thinking if you could help me because I have this like 1920s themed party that I'm going to, and I have like literally no idea what to wear. And because you're such an expert, I was thinking you could maybe help me. Yeah, sure, yeah. So basically I have this like little black dress. No! Sorry? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, go on. So yeah, so I was saying I have this little black dress that's like, it's kind of like strapless. No. Are you okay? No, that, yeah, that was my sister. Get out, I'm on my phone, stop it. Yeah, go on, sorry. So it's strapless and it has like fringe all over it. No! That was my sister again. Oh, okay. And it's kind of like a mini dress. It reaches my like half of my thighs. So I was thinking I would wear that, and then I also have like stilettos. Yeah, I'll probably just wear that. And then I was thinking like in terms of like accessories, I was thinking like a string of pearls and maybe like because I don't really have a headband, but I was thinking like you know, a piece of lace on my forehead and then like one single like feather. Do you think that would work? Would that be okay? Hello? Hi, how are you? I'm good. Just answered my own question. What is that? Oh, you like that? Oh, thank you. That's my new pin that I designed myself. I'm gonna show you. Check this out. Check this out. It's 18th century swag pin that you can get on Etsy. 20 of those are already sold. I'm gonna, you know, just go and get one, because I designed them. Back to the original topic of this sad video. 1920s. 1920s is definitely one of the most stereotyped decades I have ever witnessed. I have not witnessed 1920s, what am I talking about? And what's sad is because we all think we know what 1920s was and how people dressed and what they looked like. We don't really feel like getting to know more about it, and it's so much more than what we think it is. I don't even know where to start. I used to be one of those people. I used to be like, 1920s, okay, short dresses, frills, headbands, feathers, black gloves, pearls, black dresses, heels. Is that alright? And it wasn't until I got more into fashion history that I realized it wasn't like that in the first place, and also that it didn't happen right after Belle Époque, because I used to be like, okay, so they were the long dresses and then it was like, pop, short dresses. As, you know, as I was more interested in fashion history, I discovered that nothing in fashion history happens at once, it's all gradual. Doesn't matter whether that's crinolines to bustle dresses or bustle dresses to Belle Époque, it's always gradual. It always takes years for a single silhouette to kind of go through. So when it comes to 1920s, it all happened because of what happened before that, which is, you know, from 1908 actually, women's silhouette and style of dressing kind of started to become more simple, and people were kind of like,
wait, so we can make women's fashion comfortable at the same time?
And because of war, obviously, people started noticing that women might actually need dresses that they're able to move in, and maybe it's not the best idea to have, you know, a 1 meter diameter hat. So 1920s is kind of the effect of that way of thinking, and also from around like 1908 when Paul Poiret kind of started pursuing this new way of thinking, which was fashion could be art, and they were kind of like, wait, so we could treat fashion as art, and in that way we could be more creative with our choices and stuff. And I think all this combined made 1920s. I think the way we see 1920s today is the result of us not really understanding previous fashions and not really understanding how big of a change that was, because when we hear in 1920s the dresses were much shorter, we, as modern people, kind of imagine, okay, so they must have been really short if that made such an impact. And we don't really see how big of a difference would, let's say, 10 centimeters make if it comes to showing your calves for the first time. And the same goes for like using makeup. We're like, okay, so if they were so shocked by the 1920s makeup, then that must mean that they used a shitload of makeup. And that's not true, because you have to remember what was happening before, and before that you had to use makeup in a way that no one could ever tell you're wearing makeup. So in that case, it comes to something as small as, let's say, accentuating your eyebrows for people to go like, crap, that's shocking. And I think if we keep in mind that specific mindset, it's so much easier for us to understand what 1920s really was. And what it was, well, let me tell you that. So basically, the short dresses. The dresses up until like the mid 1920s were reaching to around mid-calf. My cat is probably urinating. Can you keep it down? No, he did not listen to me. And that was considered shockingly short, because before that, for the war, something as simple as showing your ankle was a huge thing, and they were kind of like, wow. And then around 1925, the dresses started getting even shorter, and in 1927, they were like the shortest, shockingly short, which meant they barely covered the knees. But if you're thinking of 1920s fashion as the one that kind of liberated the knees, then boy, you are wrong, because the knees were not shown in fashion until 1960s actually. Obviously when it comes to like day dresses, when it comes to, I don't know, shorts or swimwear, it's a completely different story. But when it comes to like mainstream fashion, like day-to-day fashion, they were not shown in 1920s at all. And the reason we think they were is because when the skirts barely covered the knees, obviously when you sat down with your legs crossed, or when you were stepping up I don't know, into a vehicle or something, the knees would show, obviously, because the skirt would go up a bit. But if you were just standing, like, doing nothing, the knees would always have to be covered. And obviously when you look at photographs at like what people actually wore, the knees are sometimes shown, but I think that's because they often wore clothes that they got from someone, or clothes that were not exactly fitted for them. So I think that's why on some photographs knees show, but definitely wasn't common back then. But it is true that it was the shortest the dresses have been in a long time, probably ever in fashion history. So that's why we keep thinking they got to real extremes, whereas actually they only showed the calves most of the time. And the reason we think that way is also because of the way it's been depicted in the movies afterwards. So whenever something was set in 1920, the costume designers would usually put a huge accent on the legs, but because the modern audiences are kind of used to seeing calves, they would have to make the dresses really short to make people see the legs the way the 1920s people saw the legs. So do not trust movies. And also, if you see drawings from the era depicting women's knees, like if you see drawings where you can see women's knees, that's because the proportions are all over the place. And if you see photographs where someone is deliberately showing their knees, it's probably an erotic photograph, so you should be ashamed of yourself. So that's about the length. When it comes to the makeup, it's the same thing. Again, it was shocking for 1920s people, because before that you wouldn't normally see people wearing visible makeup on the streets, but when it comes to us seeing 1920s makeup, it's not that crazy. It's mostly about the blush, it's mostly about the plucked eyebrows, which also is kind of the reason why the visible makeup was more acceptable, because obviously when you pluck your eyebrows and they're kind of light, you wouldn't be able to really see them. So in order to achieve the fashionable shape, you would need to accentuate them in some way. You also might do your eyelashes, like darken them a bit, but and some eyeshadow, but it honestly, it wouldn't be too dark, even for like nighttime makeup. Also, the reason we tend to think that 1920s makeup was like really strong is because of the silent cinema stars that had their special like film makeup on while being filmed, because the film tape at that time was not really sensitive to yellow or red. It kind of showed both yellow and red as dark, and it was not considered cool to have a dark face back then, so you obviously want your face to be as vibrant as possible, so people would just paint their faces white. And then to kind of accentuate eyes and lips, which are kind of the most important pieces of acting, let's say, they would put, you know, dark eyeshadow around their eyes, and they would have some dark lips just so they can, you know, have more expressive faces. So that's what they did, and it didn't mean that that was fashionable. They did not do that because of fashion. That was purely because of technical issues they had. Now, the accessories. The problem I have with accessories when people are trying to style themselves like 1920s is because they mix the wrong accessories. For example, I'm not a huge fan of like wearing long gloves for 1920s style dresses because that did not really happen that often in evening situations. You know, maybe if you were at like a really official thing with the Queen, let's say, and someone, that's where gloves were kind of expected to be worn. But for evening things, I don't think I've seen that many people wearing long gloves, like the ones that reach kind of over your elbow. I don't think I've seen that many women wearing those in like formal situations or like balls and stuff from 1920s. So now shoes, they were not high. They were not high. They were not higher than they were before. The heel was pretty much the same. It almost looked the same, really. It was a really kind of like a low heel that was kind of curved in a specific way, which makes it really hard nowadays to find heels like that. Which is also kind of why I get why when people have 1920s parties they just wear regular heels, because why would they look specifically for heels like that when they're really hard to find. So yeah, I totally get it, but if you want to go for something more historically accurate, your heels shouldn't be that high. They probably shouldn't be really thin, because they got thinner in 1930s, but they were quite thick in 1920s. And also T-bars were not really that huge of a thing. What I've seen on most pictures is like a single strap across the foot, and that's pretty much it. Also, I think a lot of people think that 1920s were a decade of like cloche hats, you know, the ones that are kind of really tight over your head, and what was that? Head. And that's not true. I mean, obviously it was a huge thing, especially later in the decade, from let's say 1926, 27, you could probably only see cloche hats on the streets, because I've seen group pictures where every single woman is wearing a cloche hat. But before that, that means that was for most of the decade, it was completely okay to wear either a cloche hat or a hat with a wider brim. And it was equally fashionable. Especially early in the decade, it was just as fashionable to wear a small hat as it was to wear a big wide brim hat, with a brim going a bit downwards. And also what changed in 1920s hats was that they stopped showing the forehead. They were really low when it comes to the front of your head. You could almost have your eyebrows covered by your hat. So that's something that has changed, because before that you would wear them sort of on top of your head. That's very specific for like 1920s, so if you do have a hat, try wearing it really low in front, and that should give you this like special effect. Another thing that is my pet peeve, and you know about that, is hair. So okay, basically you had two options. You either could cut your hair and have them really short, or if you didn't want to do that, you could wear them in a really low tight bun, or you could just twist them at the back of your head. Sometimes if you wanted to be fashionable but you didn't feel like cutting your hair, you would have the front of your hair cut, so you could, you know, style them in a fashionable way, and the back of your head would still be a bun. So basically you would have your long hair and the front would make you look fashionable. So those were like literally the only two options you had. Either have short hair or have long hair and pretend they're short. So that's why I don't really get why would anyone think that long waves were fashionable in 1920s, and so I don't really know where that comes from, but that would not happen in 1920s at all. And the last thing is corsets. So I've heard
In 1920s, women stopped wearing corsets.
So many times it's actually unbelievable, and it's not true, because yes, it is true that they stopped wearing corsets as they knew them before, meaning, you know, structures with boning and stuff and front opening and lacing. But again, they stopped wearing corsets in 1920s perspective, because what they wore, they didn't think of as corsets, but nowadays I think we can pretty much call them corsets. They were kind of corsets without boning. They had some elastic panels on the sides or the back to, you know, shape them differently, but they were, you know, the thing they were supposed to do was exactly what a corset would do, meaning shape the body so it adjusts to the beauty ideal better. But this time, instead of, you know, accentuating the waist, it was supposed to like flatten the silhouette, make the boobs go, make the butt kind of stay in place, and basically it kind of gave it a different silhouette, but it was still a corset. So that's something that majority of the women had to wear still, especially if they were a bit more curvy, to get the right silhouette, because the silhouette was really hard to achieve, because the beauty ideal at the time was to be flat and have no boobs whatsoever, but at the same time you couldn't be really skinny because that was not fashionable. You had to add some meat and fat. So that's really hard to achieve. So in order to achieve that, you had to flatten your chest, and that's what most people did, either by using special bras or special shirts and stuff. And then the corset was multifunctional, because at the same time it served as a garter belt. So it's not true that they didn't wear corsets. They did, to a certain extent, especially if you were not skinny and if you did not naturally have that silhouette of a flat, boyish woman. So a lot of people still did, and the only difference is you didn't have to, and you would not be considered gross and indecent. So kind of like the way they perceived corsets changed, but the way they saw the silhouette was still pretty much the same. Like, if you don't have the silhouette, you're not fashionable. So if a woman had big boobs and she didn't hide them in any way, she would be considered unfashionable. So here's another thing I legit forgot about, and that is, I wanted to mention how 1920s clothes were really, really loose, in a sense that if you have a dress that you think might work as a 1920s dress, but it's really tight, or it's a bit tighter around your waist area, there is a fair chance that it would not work as a 1920s style dress, mainly because everything back then was supposed to be really, really loose up until late 1920s, let's say 1929. So if you see something that's a bit tighter, it's not 1920s style, even though it might look better on you than having some loose robes. It's kind of strange, because back then it was considered more fashionable to look like a potato bag than having something that actually fits you, but clothes basically used to look as if they're a bit too big. So if something's a bit tighter, it probably will not work if you're looking for like a historically accurate look. Okay, so right now I can't really remember anything else I wanted to point out. I'll probably remember at least 5 things as soon as I stop recording, but these are all kind of like suggestions. I really advise you to dig deep into 1920s, because it's so much more than you think. There are so many trends that you could explore, and that might help you if you're looking for a 1920s style outfit for a party or something. You might find it in unexpected places. You might, you know, find an Indian robe that might actually work. You might have a shawl that you can just wrap around your head. And, you know, just have a look at photographs and just find some inspiration, because it's a good starting point. Yeah. Where's my boy? Do you agree with me on that? What?